Have you ever watched a game where the final score tells one story, but what really happened on the court and behind the scenes tells a completely different one? Tonight, you're not just getting highlights from the Spurs' 114-103 win over the Pistons on February 23rd, 2026. You're getting the kind of insider analysis that separates casual fans from those who actually understand what's happening in this league. This wasn't just a win, this was a seismic shift. San Antonio walked into Little Caesars Arena against the Eastern Conference's best team, the 42-14 Detroit Pistons, who entered with the top record in their conference and a 5-game win streak. And they walked out with their own 9-game winning streak intact, a season-high run that now has the Spurs firmly in the West title conversation. Here's the real question. What did Spurs coach Greg Popovich's team prove tonight that no one is talking about yet? And what does this mean for the fortunes of both franchises down the stretch and deep into the playoffs? On its face, the Spurs shot the Pistons out of the gym from deep. Devin Vassell drilled 7 triples on the night and finished with 28 points. Victor Wembanyama posted a dominant 21 points, 17 rebounds, 6-block line. And San Antonio's balanced scoring told a clear story of depth and execution. But what the mainstream numbers don't immediately capture is the narrative shift taking place, and it's subtle but enormous. First, Detroit's identity was exposed tonight in a way that analytics alone don't reveal. The Pistons are ranked top 3 in net rating and play elite basketball on both ends. They force turnovers, crash the glass and defend fiercely. Yet when asked to adapt on the fly, especially against a Spurs team that mixes schemes A, B and pop shuffle on the fly, Detroit struggled mightily. Cade Cunningham, Detroit's generational point guard and MVP talk favourite all season, finished with 16 points and 10 assists, but on a brutal 5 of 26 shooting night, fans on Reddit were already pointing out how his shot distribution and shot selection simply wasn't there, and that his defence was one of the only reasons Detroit stayed in this game early. This is more telling than it seems. In clutch moments, elite teams don't just rely on a superstar to create offense, they force others to make plays. And tonight, Detroit didn't have the supporting cast, execution or ball movement needed to pull those wins out when Cunningham was cold. Look deeper, we saw foul trouble mounting early, not just for Cunningham, but for Jalen Duren as well, which kept Detroit from establishing consistent interior presence. Wembanyama may not be a bully in the paint every night, but with his length and rim protection, San Antonio influences shots in a way that isn't captured in a box score. Detroit tried to match physicality, and for a stretch they did, but tonight the Spurs didn't blink. Stephen Castle's energy, particularly when tasked with guarding Cunningham and initiating offense, was a narrative overlooked by mainstream analysts. His assertive drives and defensive pressure helped swing possessions early, and possessions become quarters, and quarters become leads. What the headline writers aren't talking about is this. Tonight was not a fluke. This was strategic discipline, outplaying strategic aggression. The Pistons wanted this to be about muscle and paint dominance, that's their DNA. But the Spurs made it a game of positioning and spacing, pushing Detroit out of its comfort zone. That's coaching, that's preparation, that's execution. Think about this, Detroit's suspension situation, Isaiah Stewart serving time and Jalen Duren recently coming back, has kept the Pistons from truly having their preferred front court working at full strength. It's one thing to adjust to a high-flying Spurs offense, or it's another to do it without your full interior rotation. But here's the twist. Most people assume the Spurs should win because they have Wembanyama, the generational talent. What they're ignoring is the Spurs' depth and shotgun approach to offense. Vassell, Fox, Champagnie, all stepping up. That's not luck. That's culture. Now let's talk psychology. Detroit came into this game confident, boasting the East's best record. They expected to test themselves against San Antonio. But as early as the first quarter, when the Spurs jumped out to a 14-2 lead, something shifted. The Pistons looked pissed, not strategic, pissed. They wanted to impose physical dominance rather than execute their game plan. That's a mental trap. You trade discipline for emotion, and in a league this tight, that's a loss. And then there's the fans. Look at community reaction. Spurs fans are riding high, talking about perfection in February. Pistons fans are already brainstorming how to counter San Antonio's spacing with brute force, even suggesting unrealistic signings just to match up physically. Those knee-jerk reactions tell you a lot about how each culture is internalizing this game. There's a hidden narrative here that mainstream media hasn't touched, the fear factor San Antonio creates now. When teams make adjustments against Wembanyama, they aren't just adjusting their defense, they're adjusting their identity. Detroit wanted to impose toughness. The Spurs forced them into precision. That's why Detroit's normally consistent shooters went ice cold. Look at the macro landscape. The Pistons are still the number 1 seed in the East. But tonight's loss drops a psychological marker. Elite teams don't crumble late, but they do hesitate when their identity is questioned. And San Antonio didn't just win, they defined their opponent as the questioning team. And here's the financial and contract subplot no one is talking about. Cunningham is approaching an extension year. Performance in marquee games like this affects his market value, MVP candidacy narratives, and make no mistake, future contract leverage. A superstar that struggles in high leverage moments opens the door for narrative uncertainty that trickles into endorsements and Hall of Fame debates. Meanwhile, Wembanyama's stock keeps rising and San Antonio control the narrative. That's a financial shift as much as a competitive one. Detroit's front office now faces a strategic crossroads. Do you double down on interior physicality, risking payout for less flexibility, or do you diversify your roster around Cunningham to create more consistent spacing and execution? The Spurs' performance tonight makes it clear what the better long-term NBA formula looks like: shooting, spacing, and adaptable defense. Detroit's current model is still elite, but tonight exposed how fragile that model is when the opponent dictates tempo and space. And fans, they'll remember the threes and the blocks, but those in the know, the gamblers looking at reverse line movement, the advanced stat heads noticing shot quality over volume, the coaches analyzing tendencies, they know something bigger happened tonight. The Spurs intimidated the Pistons into playing reactive basketball. That's a championship team trait. So let me leave you with this. If you think this was just a nice regular season win, you're missing the real story. This was a statement, one that flips conventional wisdom on its head. San Antonio's strategic depth, psychological discipline, and execution under pressure tell us that this is no fluke streak. And Detroit's model, while still elite, just got revealed under real pressure. Here's the bold take, and I mean bold. The Spurs aren't just contenders. They are the team most likely to beat Oklahoma City and Detroit in a 7-game series, because tonight exposed not just talent, but the will to win when it hurts. That's the mark of a contender, not just a hot streak.